streets. Fuel hoses hanging from the ceiling so cars can pull in from either side. A train cleaning crew bowing before the platform has even settled. Braille printed on the top of a simple soda can. A restroom designed so well that even a parent carrying a child can move through it without stress. None of these are giant, world-changing inventions. That is exactly the point. These are small, quiet, brilliant fixes for everyday frustrations that millions of people everywhere else still treat as normal. Waiting where you should not have to wait. Struggling where design could have helped. Adapting to problems that probably should have been solved years ago. And the strange thing is, once you start noticing these details in Japan, you cannot stop. A gas station feels smarter. A vending machine feels more useful. A train platform feels more human. The ordinary starts looking unusually well thought out, and the rest of the world starts looking strangely unfinished. This video is not about robots, bullet trains, or futuristic fantasies. It is about something far more surprising. The everyday ideas Japan got right long ago. Ideas so practical, so simple, and so effective that they make normal life in most other places feel unnecessarily difficult. And once you see enough of them, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Why does daily life have to be so difficult everywhere else? Most people do not travel to Japan expecting to be impressed by the ordinary. They come for the famous things first. The neon streets of Tokyo, the bullet trains, the quiet temples, the food, the order, the almost mythic reputation for precision. But what catches you off guard is not always the big, postcard-worthy image. Sometimes it is a child seat folded neatly inside a public restroom stall. Sometimes it is a parking system that stacks cars vertically because land is scarce and space cannot be wasted. Sometimes it is a train seat that turns to face the direction of travel, as if someone stopped and asked a question most cities never bother to ask. Why should this be uncomfortable if it does not have to be? That is the world this video steps into. Not a fantasy future, not a giant technological leap. Just a country where countless small decisions seem to have been made by people who actually thought about what a normal day feels like, what it feels like to carry groceries in the rain, to travel with a baby, to get lost in a station, to need help without wanting to ask for it, to move through a crowded place and still feel that the system has made room for you. And that is where the tension begins. Because once you start seeing these solutions up close, they do not feel like charming cultural details anymore. They start to expose something uncomfortable about the rest of the world. How many daily frustrations have we quietly accepted as unavoidable? How much time, stress, and energy do people lose every single day because nobody bothered to redesign something simple? So this is not just a tour of clever Japanese ideas. It is a closer look at the mindset behind them. A mindset that treats convenience not as luxury, but as respect. A way of thinking that turns tiny improvements into a better quality of life. And as we move deeper into these ideas, the question gets sharper, not softer. If solutions like these already exist, why are so many places still making daily life harder than it needs to be? At first, it is easy to dismiss these things as isolated quirks. A clever gas station here, a thoughtful train detail there, a vending machine that seems unusually useful, a public restroom that feels strangely ahead of its time. You notice one, maybe two, and tell yourself it is just Japan being Japan. Efficient, tidy, a little obsessive in ways the internet has already turned into cliché. But then the pattern keeps repeating. You see it in places that should have been forgettable.
Japan being efficient,
in the way
like
a parking
says.
system rises vertically because the city cannot afford to waste land. In the way a train seat rotates instead of forcing passengers into needless discomfort. In the way a child can be safely placed inside a restroom stall because someone understood that convenience is not abstract. It is physical, immediate, and often urgent. Even a soda can carries a small raised mark so a blind person can tell what they are holding without asking for help. Tiny detail, quiet decision, massive difference. That is when the video changes, because now this is no longer a collection of interesting things in Japan. Now it starts to feel like evidence. Evidence of a different design philosophy. Evidence that many of the daily annoyances people around the world endure are not unavoidable at all. They are just old problems left in place for too long. And once that realization lands, it changes the way you look at everything else. Every long queue, every confusing station, Every badly designed public space, every moment when people are forced to work around a system that should have worked for them. What once looked normal starts to look lazy. What once felt minor starts to feel expensive, not just in money, but in stress, lost time, and silent frustration. That is the real turning point, because the question is no longer, why is Japan so clever? The question becomes much harder and much more interesting. If these solutions are so practical, so human, and so obviously useful, why did so many other countries never bother to build them too? So now the only honest way forward is to stop treating these ideas like trivia. Not as cute cultural details, not as travel content, not as another polished montage of Tokyo trains and glowing vending machines. If there is a real pattern here, then it deserves to be followed all the way down, to the logic behind it, the habits behind it, the priorities behind it. And that is the journey this video takes. From streets where even fuel stations are redesigned to remove friction, to public spaces shaped around the reality of how people actually move, carry, wait, search, and struggle. From accessibility details most countries still treat as optional, to everyday systems that quietly reduce stress before it ever becomes visible. Each example on its own seems small. Together, they begin to reveal something much bigger. A society that often treats design as a form of problem solving, not decoration. But there is a cost to seeing the world this way, because the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to return to the old excuse that inconvenience is simply part of life. You begin to notice how many cities ask ordinary people to compensate for bad planning with patience, endurance, or luck. You begin to realize how often individuals are forced to adapt to systems that were never carefully adapted to them. And once you see that clearly, these Japanese ideas stop feeling charming. They start feeling confrontational, not because they are loud, because they are so reasonable. That is what raises the stakes in this story. Every smart detail becomes a comparison. Every thoughtful fix becomes a quiet indictment of what millions of people elsewhere still put up with every day. A train platform is no longer just a platform. A restroom is no longer just a restroom. A parking lot, a vending machine, a gas station. Each one becomes proof that normal might simply be the result of low expectations repeated for too long. So we keep going, idea by idea, detail by detail, following this trail of practical genius toward the deeper truth underneath it. And the deeper we go, the clearer it becomes. Japan is not just showing off clever inventions. It is exposing how badly designed ordinary life still is in much of the rest of the world. And this is the moment the real truth comes into focus. Not in a laboratory, not on a futuristic stage, not in some grand cinematic reveal filled with robots and neon skylines. It appears in the smallest places first, on the platform, in the restroom, at the gas station, inside a vending machine, beside a parking structure squeezed into a city that has no room to waste. Piece by piece, example by example, the same message keeps returning. Japan did not become impressive here by inventing a different species of technology. It became impressive by refusing to ignore ordinary friction. That is the central difference. In many places, inconvenience is treated like weather, annoying, but inevitable. In Japan, at least in these moments, inconvenience is treated more like a design flaw. Something to reduce, something to anticipate, something worth fixing before it quietly steals time, dignity, energy, or patience from millions of people. And once that truth clicks, every example suddenly feels sharper. The braille on a can is no longer a clever detail. It is respect made physical. The child seat in a restroom is no longer a quirky feature. It is what happens when someone designs for real life instead of an imaginary average user. The rotating train seat, the overhead fuel hose, the compact parking systems, none of them exist to look revolutionary. They exist because someone, somewhere, took a common frustration seriously enough to solve it. That is the reveal. Not perfection, not magic, not even Japanese genius in the mythic way the internet likes to frame it. Just a culture of practical thoughtfulness, repeated often enough that it begins to reshape daily life. And that is what makes this so powerful. Because if these ideas are not miracles, then they are not out of reach. If they were designed by ordinary people responding to ordinary problems, then the rest of the world has fewer excuses than it likes to think. The most uncomfortable truth in this video is also the simplest. Life is harder in many places, not because it has to be,
Yes,
but
the
because
express
too many
train is
systems
always
were built
faster
by
in the
people
morning.
who learned to
Right, I should be
tolerate
on time for the
problems
meeting then.
instead of solving them. By the end, what stays with you is not any single invention. Not the vending machines, not the train seats, not the ceiling-mounted fuel hoses, or the compact parking towers, or the quiet accessibility details hidden in plain sight. What stays with you is the feeling that runs underneath all of them. The feeling that someone thought ahead for a stranger. That may be the rarest luxury of all. To move through a city and sense that the system is not constantly pushing
We are
back at you.
now approaching
Carry a
our
child,
next
follow a
stop.
sign, buy a drink, use a restroom, board a train, and feel that these spaces were designed by people who understood that small moments matter. Because small moments become routines. Routines become moods. Moods become the texture of daily life. And that is why ideas like these hit harder than they first appear to. They do not just save time, they lower stress. They preserve dignity. They remove tiny, repeated burdens that most societies have normalized for so long that people barely notice them anymore. Until they go somewhere else and suddenly do notice. Suddenly, what once seemed ordinary begins to feel unnecessarily rough, needlessly inconvenient, strangely outdated. That is the quiet aftershock of this video. Japan is not perfect. No country is. But these ideas reveal something many places still underestimate. Good design is not decoration, and convenience is not laziness. Thoughtful systems are not trivial. They are a form of respect. Maybe that is the real reason these everyday inventions are so unforgettable. They do not just show what a smarter society looks like. They show what it feels like when people are considered before problems happen. And once you have seen that clearly, it becomes very hard to go back to accepting friction as
40
normal.
minutes.
Because from that point on, every badly designed space asks the same silent question in return. If life could be made easier, this simply, why wasn't it?
This is what good design looks like. It just feels respectful.
Absolutely. I could stay here for hours.